My name is Selin. On the outside, I seem like just another ordinary person, but inside, I'm someone who's constantly uneasy. I've been living alone in an apartment downtown for years now. Every morning, I wake up to the same routine, head to the same monotonous job, and make small talk with the same colleagues. People who know me think I'm reserved or distant, but they don't understand what's going on inside my head. I observe how others rush to fill their emptiness with meaningless distractions, and it reminds me of the paradox of my own existence. That day was just like any other, or so I thought. But in the evening, as I passed by an antique shop, something about an old, dusty mirror in the window caught my eye. Normally, I wouldn't care for such things, but there was something magnetic about it. I couldn't quite explain it, but I felt drawn inside the shop. When I opened the door and stepped in, a musty smell filled the air, a mixture of age and dust. An old man stood behind the counter, staring at me without blinking. I approached the mirror. Behind the dusty glass, its intricate carvings and old frame made it look like a relic from another time. "Isn't it beautiful?" the shopkeeper said, his voice low, almost resonating, as though his words were meant for more than just me. "Yes. Yes, it really is," I replied, my eyes still fixed on the mirror. "How much is it?" The man smiled faintly. "That mirror's price isn't for someone like you, but if you truly want it, I would advise caution," he said cryptically. There was something in his tone that made my heart race. It felt as if I were about to acquire something more than just a mirror. After a brief moment, I found myself walking out of the store with the mirror. I didn't even question it, only the overwhelming sense of anticipation coursing through me. When I got home, I placed it directly across from my bed, as though it were meant to be there. The reflections in it were dark, distorted, and when I looked at it, there was an undeniable presence, as if it were alive, watching me. At first, I thought it was just the light playing tricks, but something about it unsettled me. After bringing the mirror home, I began to notice strange things happening. At first, they were subtle. Every time I entered my room, the air felt heavier, as though something was watching me. The mirror never seemed to reflect things quite right. It would seem as though it had changed subtly each time I glanced at it, an almost imperceptible difference, but enough to unnerve me. At night, I could feel something lingering in the doorway, but when I looked, nothing was there. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I stared into the mirror, hoping for answers. That's when it happened. My reflection looked back at me, but something was wrong. For just a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move behind me, but when I turned around, no one was there. My skin crawled, but I couldn't look away. For days, I continued to stare into the mirror, unable to stop myself. The pull was irresistible. Each time, the reflection seemed to shift. One night, I saw a woman's face emerge from the depths of the glass. At first, it was just a vague outline, but then it solidified, a pale face with hollow eyes and an unsettling smile. Her features were gaunt, but there was a strange familiarity to her, though I didn't recognize her. Who are you?" I whispered to the mirror. Her lips parted slightly, as though she were about to speak, but no sound came. The air in the room grew cold. I felt a strange connection to her, as if there was something she wanted to communicate. "Please," the woman mouthed, though I didn't hear her voice. Suddenly, a chill spread through the room. The atmosphere was thick, heavy, and suffocating. My breath caught in my chest, but I couldn't look away. The woman in the mirror beckoned with her hand, her fingers moving slowly, as if inviting me to come closer. The next day, I couldn't concentrate. Everything around me felt distant, as though I were in a dream. I could hear the words of my colleagues, but they sounded hollow, like echoes from another world. The only thing on my mind was returning home to that mirror, to see the woman again. When night fell, I didn't hesitate. I returned to my room, to the mirror. The woman was there, waiting. This time, her face was clearer. Her eyes, dark and hollow, stared at me with such intensity that I felt as if she were peering straight into my soul. Her smile grew, an eerie, knowing smile. "I've been waiting for you," she whispered. I was frozen in place. Her voice was faint but unmistakable, a voice that seemed to come from inside my mind. I wanted to step back, to leave, but my feet felt heavy, like I was stuck in place. Without thinking, my hand reached out toward the mirror. As my fingers touched the cold glass, a jolt of electricity shot through my body, making me gasp. The reflection of the woman in the mirror became more vivid, as though she were reaching back. Her hand was now pressed against the surface of the mirror, mirroring mine. And then, everything changed. The room around me seemed to distort. The air grew thick with shadows, and the mirror, which once held only a reflection, now seemed like a doorway, one that I had just opened. I felt myself being drawn in, but I resisted. But it was too late. The force pulling me was too strong. The room began to spin, and in an instant, I was no longer in my apartment. I had crossed into the mirror world. The moment I opened my eyes, everything around me was wrong. The air was oppressive, the colors faded, and there was an unearthly stillness in the air. The world in the mirror was a twisted version of my own. The walls were cracked and broken, the furniture covered in layers of dust. I took a hesitant step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, fleeting figures that vanished when I tried to focus on them. It felt like I was being watched, but I couldn't tell by whom. And then I heard it, a faint whisper, like a voice carried on the wind. "Help me." I turned sharply, but there was no one there. Only the echo of the voice lingered in the air. I had to find a way out. But how? The mirror had already begun to close behind me, trapping me in this strange, twisted world. I wasn't sure how much time had passed when I saw her again, the woman. She stood in front of me, her face now clearer than ever. Her eyes were empty, but there was something in them that pleaded for help. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing: whatever had brought me here, I had to find a way to escape before the mirror's curse consumed me completely. I wasn't sure how long I had been trapped in this place. Time here didn't seem to work the same way it did in the real world. The seconds stretched into minutes, and the minutes felt like hours. The air was thick with a sense of death, an unspoken heaviness that made it hard to breathe. Shadows swirled around me like fog, clinging to the corners of this forsaken world. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the house itself were alive, watching me. I tried to move forward, but the ground beneath me felt unstable, as though it were shifting with each step. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something, someone, moving in the shadows, but they were always gone before I could make sense of what I had seen. My heart raced with every movement, every creak of the floor beneath my feet. The woman in the mirror was gone now, leaving only her echo in my mind. But her eyes. I could still see them, haunting me, following my every move. "Help me." The words echoed in my head, and no matter how hard I tried to focus on something else, they would not go away. I wandered through the house, or whatever this place was, searching for any sign of escape, anything that might lead me back to my world. The house was decaying, the furniture old and covered in layers of dust. The windows were dark, obscured by grime that made it impossible to see outside. It was like a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. Every room I entered felt the same, cold, abandoned, yet filled with an oppressive presence. I tried calling out, but my voice only seemed to fade into the air, swallowed by the silence. My breath quickened as I realized that I was alone, or so I thought. And then I saw it. A door, slightly ajar, with a faint light spilling through the crack. It was different from all the other rooms I'd explored. Something about it called to me. I didn't hesitate. I moved toward it, pushing the door open with trembling hands. What lay beyond was unlike anything I had ever seen. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows, its walls lined with mirrors, tall, antique mirrors that reflected distorted versions of everything around them. But the reflections were wrong. They weren't just distorted, they were alive. In the mirrors, I saw versions of myself, some crying, others smiling eerily, others just staring, empty-eyed. There were other figures too, figures that didn't belong. In one mirror, I saw a man, his face twisted in pain. In another, a child, lost and frightened. The reflections shifted constantly, as though the mirrors were alive, constantly changing what they showed me. It felt like a prison, a place where people's souls were trapped, forever unable to escape. I stepped into the room, drawn in by the mirror's strange power. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. I spun around, panic rising in my chest. There was no way out. I was trapped. A cold laugh echoed through the room. It wasn't the woman's voice, it was something deeper, more menacing. A shadow passed by me, too fast for me to catch. I froze, feeling the temperature in the room drop. The mirrors grew darker, their surfaces swirling with dark smoke, as though they were alive and hungry for something. "Welcome," a voice whispered. It was familiar, yet not at the same time. "I've been waiting for you." The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding me. My pulse quickened as I turned in a circle, trying to locate the source. But there was nothing, just the shifting mirrors, each one showing a different, twisted version of reality. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my attempt at courage. A figure materialized in the corner of the room, a dark silhouette, barely visible against the shadows. It stepped forward, and I saw it clearly for the first time, a woman, tall and thin, her skin pale and translucent. Her eyes glowed an unnatural shade of blue, piercing through the darkness like twin stars. She smiled at me, a cruel smile that sent a chill through my entire body. "I am what you seek," she said, her voice both soft and menacing. "I am the keeper of this place, the one who guards the souls trapped within these mirrors." "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You have already come too far," she replied, her smile widening. "You have awakened something that cannot be undone. The curse has already claimed you, Selin. There is no escape now." I took a step back, my heart racing. "No. I need to get out of here. You don't understand, I don't belong here. I was just curious. Please, let me go." She shook her head slowly, her long, dark hair shifting like smoke around her face. "Curiosity is what brought you here. But now you are mine. And you will remain here, with the others. Forever." I felt a coldness spread through me as her words sank in. I was trapped. There was no way out. No way back. This place was my prison now. My breath quickened as a wave of terror washed over me. Suddenly, the mirrors around me began to shimmer, and the air grew thick with an eerie presence. Figures began to materialize within the mirrors, figures I recognized from before, faces I had seen only as reflections. But now, they were real. They stepped out of the mirrors, their forms solidifying as they slowly approached me. "Please," I whispered, backing away. "I don't want to be here. I don't belong here." The woman's laugh filled the room again. It was soft, almost musical, yet filled with malice. "You don't get to decide that, Selin. You are already part of this world. You always were." I turned and ran, desperation pushing me forward. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get away. The figures were closing in on me, their cold eyes fixed on me, their hands reaching for me. I stumbled, my heart pounding in my chest as I dashed through the maze of mirrors. I heard her voice again, echoing through the room, growing louder, more insistent. "You cannot escape, Selin. The mirrors will always find you. You will never leave." The words rang in my ears, and for a moment, I felt like I was drowning in them. But then something inside me snapped. I couldn't let this be my fate. I refused to become just another soul trapped in these cursed mirrors. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to fight. I had to find a way out. I ran. I didn't know where I was going anymore, but every part of me screamed to get away from the oppressive darkness that threatened to consume me. The figures in the mirrors were closing in, their distorted, twisted faces inching closer with every second. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I could feel the coldness of their touch, their fingers brushing my skin even though they were still far away. I stumbled through the maze of mirrors, my hands pressed against the cold glass, desperate to find something, anything, that could help me escape this nightmare. The reflections in the mirrors shifted and morphed, showing faces I didn't recognize, scenes of pain and anguish, images of people trapped in eternal torment. I was beginning to lose my sense of reality. Was this even real? Or was I just another lost soul, already slipping into madness? The woman, the keeper of this place, was still out there somewhere, her voice echoing in the back of my mind, always reminding me that I could never leave. Her presence was suffocating, surrounding me, pushing me closer to the edge. "Selin, you can't outrun me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet it felt like it was coming from inside my mind. "You can't escape. You are mine now." I shook my head, trying to block out her words. I couldn't let her control me. I wouldn't let this place claim me like it had claimed so many others. As I ran, I caught sight of something out of place, something I had missed before. A door. It was a simple wooden door, old and worn, almost hidden in the shadows. It stood there, waiting for me. For a moment, I hesitated. Could it be real? Was it another trap? But something deep inside me told me that it was the way out. It was my only chance. Without thinking, I pushed the door open, stepping into what seemed like another room. But this room was different. There were no mirrors here. The air felt warmer, and the oppressive silence that had filled the house was gone. I looked around, confused, but then I saw it, a mirror, standing alone in the middle of the room. It was the same mirror that had brought me here in the first place. The mirror gleamed in the dim light, its surface perfectly still. I could see my reflection in it, but it wasn't the same as before. This time, I didn't see the distorted version of myself or the woman's face. Instead, I saw something else, something that made my heart skip a beat. The room behind me, the one I had just come from, was reflected in the glass, but it was different. The figures that had been chasing me, the distorted faces, were gone. The woman, the keeper of this world, was nowhere to be seen. But as I looked closer, I saw something else. A faint crack in the mirror. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. The crack was small, almost unnoticeable at first, but as I watched, it grew wider, the edges splintering like a web. The crack spread across the glass like a disease, slowly breaking it apart. I reached out, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold surface. The moment I touched it, the room around me seemed to shudder. The air grew thick again, and the oppressive presence returned. The figures in the mirrors began to shift, moving faster now, their eyes fixed on me. But this time, I didn't feel fear. I felt determined. With a sudden surge of strength, I pressed harder against the mirror. The crack widened, spreading across the glass like a spider's web. I could hear the echoes of the voices, the trapped souls, whispering from within. Their voices mixed with the woman's, their pleas and cries growing louder. "You cannot escape, Selin," the woman's voice said again, but it wasn't as confident this time. There was a tremor in her tone, a crack in her facade. "I'm not staying here," I whispered to myself. "I'm not one of you." With a final push, the mirror shattered. The sound of glass breaking was deafening. The pieces scattered around me, falling to the floor in slow motion, each shard reflecting a piece of the twisted world that had trapped me. But as the glass hit the floor, the world around me began to change. The shadows that had once filled the room began to recede. The figures that had haunted me vanished into the cracks, dissolving into nothingness. The temperature warmed, and the oppressive weight lifted from my chest. I felt the grip of the curse weaken, like a heavy fog lifting from my mind. The woman's voice, that voice that had haunted me since the moment I entered this world, began to fade. The last thing I heard was her whispering, almost pleading, "You cannot escape." But I had already won. I woke up with a gasp, my body jolting upright in my bed. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm, familiar glow across the room. I blinked rapidly, disoriented, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it all been a dream? Was it real? The mirror. I turned my head to the corner of the room, my eyes landing on the antique mirror I had brought home. It was still there, standing as it had before. But this time, it didn't feel like a threat. It was just a mirror. A reflection. No longer an entryway to a twisted world. I slowly stood up, my legs weak, my body trembling. I had made it out. I had broken the curse. The mirror had no power over me anymore. As I approached the mirror, I reached out cautiously, my fingers brushing against the surface. There was no eerie pull this time, no strange coldness. It was just glass. Ordinary glass. I exhaled, my breath shaky but relieved. I had escaped. But as I turned to walk away, I caught a flicker in the reflection, just for a moment. A fleeting shadow, moving at the edge of my vision. I froze. The reflection in the mirror shifted. And I saw her again, the woman. Her pale face, her hollow eyes, staring back at me. But this time, she wasn't smiling. Her lips moved, forming a single word. "Help." And for the briefest moment, I wasn't sure if I had truly escaped.